There is a kind of man who disappears from the race without announcing it. He does not write a resignation letter. He does not make a speech. He simply stops running one morning, looks at the road ahead of him, full of other people's footprints and other people's ambitions, and he turns around and walks back to his own life. Most people never notice he left. A few call him lazy. A smaller few, the ones who are paying close attention, recognize something in his eyes that they cannot quite name, but that terrifies them, because it looks uncomfortably like peace. You might be that man. You might be the one who has spent years performing a version of yourself that was designed entirely for the approval of people who were never going to give it to you anyway. And somewhere between one exhausting morning and another, you started feeling this quiet pull towards something that had no name and no LinkedIn profile and no 5-year plan attached to it. If that is where you are right now, this video was made for you. Charles Bukowski spent most of his life being told he was doing it wrong. He drank too much, wrote too honestly, worked jobs that respectable people pretended not to need, loved women who broke him in ways that made him more whole, and refused with every cell in his body to become the kind of person that the culture had decided was worth celebrating. And yet, he became one of the most read, most quoted, most quietly necessary voices of the 20th century, not despite his refusal to chase, but because of it. There is something in that fact that most people walk right past without stopping to think about what it actually means. Here is the thing nobody tells you about ambition. It is not neutral. It is not simply energy in search of a direction. Ambition, as the modern world has packaged and sold it, is a very specific kind of hunger that requires you to need things you would not naturally need if left alone. It requires you to care about metrics that exist only inside systems built by people who benefit from your participation. It requires you to be chronically dissatisfied, because a satisfied person is a person who stops buying, stops competing, stops performing. The machine does not want you to stop. The machine needs your restlessness the way a casino needs your hope. And Bukowski, without ever writing a single self-help book or delivering a single TED Talk, understood this with the kind of bone-deep clarity that only comes from having been ground down far enough to see what is underneath all the noise. Bukowski did not romanticize poverty. Or let us be clear about that, because the misreading of his work has sent more than a few people down roads that lead nowhere useful. He did not think suffering was inherently beautiful, or that failure was something to be sought. What he thought, what he wrote in poem after poem, story after story, was that the failure to become what society wanted you to become was not actually failure at all. It was a clearing. A demolition of the fake architecture that had been built around you before you were old enough to have any say in the design. When he wrote about the men and women at the bottom, the ones sorting mail at 3 a.m, the ones drinking alone in rooms that smelled of old wood and cigarette smoke, the ones who had been passed over and overlooked and dismissed, he was not writing pity. He was writing recognition. He was saying, I see you, and what I see is not a tragedy. What I see is a person who has survived something that most people never had the courage to even look at directly. The man who stops chasing is not giving up. This is the first thing you need to understand and hold on to when the voices start. And they will start. The voices of everyone who has a stake in your continued participation in the performance. The man who stops chasing is doing something that requires more strength than continuing, because continuing is easy. Nice continuing is just momentum. You do not have to make a decision to keep running if you never stop to ask whether the race was worth entering. Stopping requires a kind of brutal honesty that most people spend their entire lives avoiding, because they sense correctly that once you start being honest about what you actually want versus what you have been told to want, there is no comfortable way back. Bukowski knew this. He had tried the conventional life in fragments, the steady jobs, the attempts at normalcy, and each time it felt like wearing a suit made for someone else's body. Eventually, he stopped trying to make it fit and started writing about what it felt like to be the wrong shape for the world that kept insisting on dressing him. If you have felt this, if you have felt the specific exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that was assembled from expectations that were never yours to begin with, I want you to stop for a moment and do something. And go to the comments right now and write this. Copy it exactly if you need to. I stopped chasing something that was never really mine. Write it there, because someone else is going to watch this video in the middle of a night that feels too long and too quiet. and they are going to scroll down to the comments, and they are going to see your words, and for the first time in a long time, they are going to feel less alone in what they are carrying. That is not a small thing. That is the only kind of connection that actually matters. One person in the dark recognizing another person in the dark, and both of them understanding without explanation that the dark is not the enemy. Bukowski wrote in one of his poems that what matters most is how well you walk through the fire, not how quickly, not how cleanly, not whether you emerge without burns, how well. There is a philosophy compressed into that phrase that takes most philosophical traditions several volumes to approximate. It is a philosophy of endurance without performance, of suffering without spectacle, of survival that does not require an audience. The man who stops chasing has often already walked through significant fire. He has often already tried the things he was supposed to try and found them hollow or brutal, or simply not built for the particular shape of his interior life. And what he is entering now, in this phase, is not a defeat. It is the beginning of a relationship with himself that he was never allowed to develop while he was busy trying to become someone else's idea of a success. The most powerful phase of a man's life rarely looks powerful from the outside. This is perhaps the cruelest joke of the whole arrangement. The moments of greatest internal transformation, the ones that will eventually produce something real and lasting and genuinely his own, tend to happen in rooms that no one is watching, in hours that no one celebrates, in the slow and unglamorous work of learning what he actually thinks when no one is asking him to think something specific. Bukowski's career as a writer did not explode into the world when he was young and hungry and hustling for recognition. It developed in post offices and bars and small apartments, in years of rejection and silence, and continued writing anyway. All in the accumulation of a voice that became unmistakable precisely because it had never been engineered for approval. He was not building a brand. He was building himself, one raw, honest page at a time, with no guarantee that anyone would ever care. And this is the part that most people who quote Bukowski never quite reckon with. The stopping is not enough on its own. The man who stops chasing and then simply stagnates has not entered his most powerful phase. He has entered a waiting room that he may never leave. What makes the stopping transformative rather than just passive is what happens in the space that opens up after the race has been abandoned. That space will feel uncomfortable at first because you have been trained to fill every silence with productivity, every emptiness with consumption, every moment of stillness with the anxiety that you are falling behind. The discomfort is not a sign that you have made a mistake. The discomfort is the sound of the machine losing its hold on you, and machines do not let go quietly. What fills that space, if you let it, is the specific and unrepeatable texture of your own actual existence. The things you notice when you are not performing, noticing for anyone. The thoughts you have when you are not curating your thoughts for a feed or a room or a version of yourself that needs to be maintained. And Bukowski once said that the problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts while the stupid ones are full of confidence. Strip away the provocation for a moment and look at what is underneath it. There is a case being made for the value of uncertainty, for the person who is not sure, who is questioning, who has stopped pretending to have it figured out. That person is closer to something real than the one performing certainty for the comfort of crowds. The man who has stopped chasing begins to notice things. He begins to notice what he actually loves without the contamination of what he is supposed to love. He begins to notice the quality of light at specific times of day, the way certain music does something to his chest that he cannot explain, the conversations that leave him feeling more like himself instead of less. He begins to notice his own patterns with a clarity that was impossible when he was moving too fast to see himself from the outside. This is not navel-gazing. This is reconnaissance. This is the gathering of intelligence about a territory he has been assigned to inhabit for the rest of his life, and that he has been, until now, too busy to actually explore. Bukowski's work is full of men who made this turn, quietly and without ceremony. Men who stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be accurate. Accurate about what they felt, what they wanted, what they could not bear, what they loved without apology. And in that accuracy, in that relentless commitment to describing the actual rather than the aspirational, they found something that the chasers, the performers, the men still running the race could not access no matter how fast they ran. They found the authority that comes only from living your own life rather than the rough draft of someone else's expectations. If you are in this phase right now, or entering it, or sensing its approach from somewhere just over the horizon of your current exhaustion, I want to say something directly to you. This is not the end of your story. This is not even close to the end. What feels like stopping is actually a reorientation. Your energy is not gone. It is redirecting towards something that is actually yours. The most powerful version of you is not the one who ran fastest in a direction he never chose. It is the one who sat down long enough to figure out which direction he would actually choose if the choice were genuinely his, and then walked there, slowly if necessary, in his own time, in his own way. If this reached something in you today, if some part of this felt like a truth you have been sitting with alone for too long, I'll do something simple right now. Press the like button, not for any abstract reason, but because the algorithm is the modern gate, and the only way this message finds the person who needs it tonight is if people who already found it tell the system it matters. One press is a small thing for you, and a potentially significant thing for someone you will never meet who is sitting in a room right now feeling exactly the way you felt before you started watching. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, consider this an invitation without pressure. Every video here is made for the person who has started to question the terms of the life they were handed, who finds more truth in an honest sentence than in a motivational poster, who is done being managed and wants instead to be understood. If that is you, this is your space. Come back whenever you need. To remember that the race was never the point, and that the man who stopped running is not behind. He is finally, after everything, exactly where he needs to be.